When I was in college was my first introduction to Buddhism. I was studying philosophy and my teacher wasn't quite a Buddhist teacher, but he would bring some concepts into the classes. It was an existential class. And I remember I was playing frisbee with a friend of mine at the quad, which is the green area on our campus. And we were playing, and then we saw two monks walking by on the sidewalk, and it was like I didn't really know what a monk was or what they were doing on our campus. And so my friend and I walked up to them and we were like, "Hey, like what are y'all doing here?" And they didn't speak English very well or at all. And so I was like, "Okay, do you want to play frisbee?" And they were cool. They were like, "Yeah." So they got onto the quad with us and we played frisbee with each other for like a little bit of time, and then they left. And then later that night, my friend and I, same friend, were driving, and we saw them on the side of the road, and we were like, "Hey, do you all? What do you? It's like 10 o'clock. It's the dangerous neighborhood. Are you okay?" And they were like, "I need to find my house, like home, home. I don't know." So they got in the car, and we just drove, and we were like, "This way, that way." We ended up finding their house. They were staying with one of the professors or something like that because they were doing a sand project on campus. So that was my first introduction to Buddhism. But when I first started getting very interested in like the actual wisdom of Buddhism and practices was when I came to Mangalam in 2014, which was because this professor who I mentioned earlier, I had told him like, "Hey, I figured out that I don't want to go into business, which is what I was studying. You had to wear a tie and stuff on a certain day of the month. It was that kind of business school." I remember one day I was like, "I'm not gonna dress up like that," and that was like my way of rebelling. It felt like a rat race to me, and it was becoming clear. And when I said that, he was like, "Hey, you might want to check out this place in Berkeley. They have full time volunteers there. It's a residential program." And so I looked it up, I applied, and had an interview. Yeah, and then I started here. I think when I started practicing in this particular way, like not through reading philosophy, but more of the meditation practices, it really brought me from like this conceptual understanding to having a more embodied sense of what that meant. Like, what does be here now mean? What does be more present mean? That would be like the distinguishing factor, I think, from Buddhism and the other kind of Western philosophies that I studied. I think the biggest thing for me is a kind of a relaxed approach. It feels relaxed to me. And I think it's because, before I was kind of going off of the whim of every thought that had content. I was like moving with it. Okay, I have to do this. I have to do that. This person thinks this. This person thinks that. I need to get good grades, whatever it was. And it was like this. I was perpetually thrusted into the next moment. Whereas now, the way that I see experience just feels completely different. The thought will come up, and I'll experience that thought, and it will be an option, um, and it will inform my decisions and stuff. But yeah, I guess it just feels more relaxed. I definitely think there's this element of choice, or at least like you're aware that the reason you might be making this decision is because of everything that came before. Like maybe the systems that have pushed you in this direction. Like, so I'm aware that this is my pattern. The pandemic happened, is happening. For the first 2 weeks or so, I was kind of like rearranging things. Everybody's home and I'm not going into work anymore. A lot of my job was, interacting with the students at Mangalam. So everything was kind of in flux. I think what's kept me grounded, I want to say this, I'm a little hesitant to say it, but what's kept me grounded is accountability. I teach a class on Thursdays, and so it's like, okay, I have to show up to that class. I have people that are counting on me, and I enjoy being there with these people. And so that means Monday I'm reading the material and I'm thinking about how to express it. And then Tuesday, I'm like practicing with that material and I meet with Jack and I see how the material works well. And then, Wednesday again, I review the material. And then Thursday, I teach the class with Jack. And so I have this responsibility to present this class material well. So that keeps me focused on practice. So I have these different things that I've committed to that keep me accountable to the practice, meditation, or mindfulness. And I do that on purpose because I know that when I am practicing, it kind of unfolds in my life, and then I can act in more accord with my values. So yeah, I kind of put things in place to make me accountable to my practice. Part of that is I meet every morning with the rest of Mangalam just to check in and say, like, hi, like, we're starting our day. And that really does get me going. Like, it keeps me, like, motivated and like I'm still part of this group, even though it's virtual. In the same way, we close the day at 5 o'clock every day. And so these points of accountability, I think, are really what's keeping me like aligned with my values. Any practices that you're doing that you value, it's that commitment piece. So whether it's you saying at 9 o'clock, whether I want to or not, I'm going to be there and I'm going to play the guitar, even if it's for 5 minutes. It's like that kind of discipline. I think it's been really helpful for me in these times, and I've noticed how many of them I've set up. I also have a commitment to community, like Mangalam and the Mindful Living program, and everyone that's part of Mangalam is my community, and I have a sense of responsibility to, like, make sure that my community is well and balanced, and also like taking action to help the larger community. Being in community is such a spiritual practice for me. One way community fits into practice is communication. I see a big link between mindfulness practices and communication. Another one is kind of committing to be with this group of people for a long period of time. I get to see like the life of our relationship. So through conflict, we're still in community. Through resolution, we're still in community. Through the joyful moments, through the hardship, and I kind of like get to see it go through these waves to a point where like it kind of reaches this equilibrium, and that's a spiritual practice for me. It's definitely still something I'm working out in myself. Like I can feel a shift, and a lot of it has to do with how does mindfulness play a role in systems thinking or social change. Because as the pandemic is happening, it's very clear to me, and to many people in the Bay Area, like it's a big uprising. The systems that were in place weren't taking everyone into account. And there's a lot of material out there, like on how to move forward in alternative systems of economy. But I was thinking, like, what is my contribution to this? And aside from like participating and educating myself on those alternative economies, I'm also thinking about Mangalam and how we can contribute with mindfulness. And so that's where I'm saying I've been thinking a lot about mindfulness and systems thinking and how they intersect. Is that aside from building resilience and having a place to ground when times are overwhelming, there's also kind of getting clear on everything that's brought you to this moment now, like the stories that have brought you to this moment now. And to me, that points a lot to like how the systems are kind of shaping the way for you to move forward. And each person with different identities has different way that they were guided. And I think mindfulness can really tune us into the stories that we're living in this moment. And that includes the past and like how the structures have, like, you can be aware of the past and how it's affecting your present moment and how it will perpetuate you into the future. And you can see that line, that kind of flow. I think there are a lot of people who are aware of the illness of our systems, and a lot of people were like, having workshops and alternative MBAs that were teaching people about it. But there were a large number of people who weren't. Or even if you were, it was like, yeah, no, climate change is real. But the actions weren't really matching the need of the time. And so a disaster like this really like ripped the veil off from some who were like, there are no problems here. Because now you hear people who didn't believe in what some people were saying are saying things like, no, I'm going to move to the mountains and like start my own farm. And although that's not really addressing it, it's addressing that the systems are not working. And so that's, I'm like, okay, great. So we're on the same page. And for the people who, like, myself in a lot of ways, who felt that the systems were not set up well, now it's like the pressure's on. And it's like, so now we have a deadline kind of thing. And there's the pressure and the motivation, but also the opportunity. I think it's like, because everything's on pause, there's so much opportunity to really start anew, and that means kind of bringing people on board and going back to the feelings and needs and kind of researching before a conversation. It's kind of like that in some ways, and a lot of that is so that we can kind of connect and be like, okay, so you need this and I need this, cool. And so now that this pandemic is happening, and now we can agree like the system is not set up well, right? Like, do we agree there? And I think there's a lot of opportunity now that we've kind of touched that. The challenges that I find during the pandemic are the interpersonal relationships, like within housing units. Um, like, I live with 8 people. Don't tell my landlord. No, I'm just kidding. So I live with 8 people, and these are stressful times. And so, yes, we can all be getting along and have open communication for some time, but if one thing happens that kind of disrupts somebody and they're not in a good place, it can be dynamic. So there's been a lot of work on like my end and our housemates' end to really communicate a lot and check in and be kind to each other in that respect. But that can also be, I mean, being there for someone can take energy too. And so I've been noticing that, especially because my role at Mangalam is also on this page, and so it's it yeah, I've noticed that's my challenge place. Is I'm like, I don't know if I have enough capacity to care for everyone the way that I want to, and at the same time take care of myself so that I'm not like blowing up on anybody or something like that. Before big conversations, like when I see a big conversation coming, I try to think about that person's story and like what they're experiencing, like why they're upset, maybe behind the content of why they're upset. And if I can, like if it's a planned meeting, if I'm like, okay, let's talk about it tomorrow, I'll do some research. Like I'll sit down with some nonviolent communication words, and I'm like feelings and needs, and I'm like, this looks like the feeling that they might be feeling. This is what I'm feeling. This looks like their need. This is my need. And I'll really sit with that. So I'll kind of like prepare for a big meeting, because these times call for such preparation, I think, for me, my level of communication skills. So, and that's been really helpful. My relationships are so much stronger with people because we've had this conflict and then we creatively went to a solution. Like now we feel closer, which is kind of the hidden gem of all of this disaster that's happening.